Hey, my name is Marshy. Welcome to the third episode of Reddit Horror Stories. Before this starts, I just wanted to let you know I'm considering branching out to other videos. Cryptids, SCPs, urban legends. I'm even working on a Jeepers Creepers Reborn review. So let me know in the comments and on the Discord. What do you think? Let's once again dive into the depths of r/nosleep. Okay, now we're at the first story. This one was posted by u/Rosie Rose 2 months ago. Why I stopped working at the morgue. Up until about a year ago, I was a mortician. Many know that morgues are more of a family business. I mean, I certainly didn't know that, but it is inherited by family members. My situation was no different. But there were a few rules that had to be followed. Rule number 1. No prepping bodies from 12 a.m. to 5 p.m. This rule made it so that nobody was in the morgue past 11:30 at night. On the few occasions someone arrived at the morgue at those times, the only person who would prepare them would be my grandmother. Nowadays, some morgues no longer have night shifts, and ours follows that suit except for my grandmother. If someone needed to be prepped, she was the one to do it, no matter what hour of night. Rule number 2. When entering or leaving any room in the morgue itself, you are supposed to say hello and goodbye. I never understood this rule, but I never dared to question it. Rule number 3. Never forget your family protection amulet. This rule was most important and stressed rule. These amulets were passed down from the family to anyone who worked at the morgue. My grandmother always said that they protect us from the unnatural world. Ooh, spooky. I love it. While I never had much belief in that stuff myself, I never went against my grandmother's rules. She also stressed that I had to believe in the amulet for it to work. For her, I did believe in it a bit. During the time I worked at the morgue, I noticed that I was the only one who ever had stuff happen to them. It was nothing too serious, just misplacement of my car keys. It never bothered me, and I brushed it off as family members pulling prank on me. That wasn't until 2 weeks before I quit. A person had come in that night at 12 a.m. and my grandmother, who normally prepared, was at the hospital. No one else who worked there wanted to do it, so I did. I know. They sounded highly unprofessional, but everyone in my family sticks to the rules very religiously. Damn, we need some more rule breakers in this family. Get it, Queen. I came in and immediately noticed something was off about the morgue. It looked the same as it always did, but it didn't feel the same. I shivered at the cold that surrounded me. I focused on just getting the person prepped. As I worked, I felt something stare at me, but never saw anything. Things I needed would be misplaced, and I have to go search for them. This made it take longer than it needed to be done but by 3 a.m. I was done. I placed the body into the refrigerated mortuary cabinet and got ready to leave. I was walking back to the lobby when the lights shut off. They came on about after 3 minutes, and the morgue now looked even more run down and old. I tried looking at the window, but it was completely black. No sign of street lamps. It was almost like an alternate version of reality itself. I felt sick to my stomach and brushed the thought aside. I hurriedly headed to the door, but it was locked. I kept turning it until I heard the sounds of nails scraping against the wall behind me. I slowly turned around, and there stood a humanoid creature. There wasn't much I could see of it, since it was covered in swirling black mist. With it came the smell of death and sulfur. I gagged at the smell. It started walking closer, scraping its nails against the wall. I tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. Feeling hopeless, I grabbed my amulet and started praying. It laughed. "That won't work. You don't truly believe." Its laugh and voice were awful, like metal being crushed together. It sounded like multiple people speaking at different octaves. As it passed the windows, they cracked and shattered, spraying me with glass. I began to cry, as I felt like my life was going to end. I held the amulet tighter and prayed harder. It rushed and grabbed me. Like I said, that won't work. You're in my world now. I struggled through fear and sobs. What do you mean? This place was a portal to hell before it was ever a morgue. Why do you think there were those stupid rules? I had turned completely cold. It raised its claw hand up and stabbed through my stomach. I shuddered as I felt the pain burn through my body. I felt my body go limp as I passed out. When I woke up, I was there. I was previously, but the morgue looked the same as it always did in the day. It no longer looked run down and off. There were no signs of that entity, no shards of glass on the floor. I went to get up, but a sharp pain shot through me. I looked down on my stomach and there were 3 claw marks seared into my skin. My skin was a weird charcoal black color and smoldered where the entity had stabbed me. The glass from the windows had been embedded into my arm as well. Slight blood trickled from some of the cuts, but they were nothing compared to the black sears on my stomach. I got up and went to the lobby. I checked the clock and it was 5:01. I'd been out for about 2 hours. I quickly got my car keys and I left. When I got home, I first cleaned up my seared stomach and wrapped it up, and then pulled the embedded glass from my arms and cleaned the cuts and wrapped them. Then I went to my room and fell asleep. After that, I was sick for 2 weeks. When I was sick, I refused to see any of my family members. I didn't know how they would react if they know I'd gotten sick after I'd gone to the morgue after 12 a.m. My grandmother had recovered, and she was the one who was trying to contact me the most. The 3 claw marks were still on my skin. They looked like black burned scars. I could barely sleep at night from the recurring nightmares of that entity. Once I felt better, I visited my grandma and I told her I was quitting. She didn't ask any questions, and she almost seemed to already know why. The only thing she said was, "When you are ready, I'll listen." I left her house in tears. I'm sure she knew that I had the encounter with the entity. Did she ever encounter it? Or did her belief keep her safe? I didn't know the answer, but I'm convinced I'm sure that entity was the reasoning for the weird rules at the morgue. About 3 months ago, I told my grandmother what happened, and she consoled me. She placed what was called a protection prayer on me, and after everything that happened, I hold a strong belief in the unnatural world, or the unseen world, or whatever you want to call it. SCPs, cryptids, whatever. I still have long night terrors, very often, and suffer from insomnia. Same, dude, same. Due to the night terrors, but I'm getting help with that. Stay safe out there for the people who don't assume that everything is as it appears. Man, this was a good one. I really liked this one. I'd probably rate it about a 7 out of 10. Pretty solid, man. I really like the description of the actual creature itself. It gave me some shivers, man. Really nice. Alright, let's move on to the next story, shall we? This next story was posted by J Group 2 months ago. My uncle disappeared into an imaginary world of his own creation. Since I was a little kid, my great-uncle Ivan lived with us in our basement. He's a surrealist painter by trade, and his works are beautifully done, whimsical and thought-provoking oil pieces. Worthy of being stared at for hours, each time I looked at one of his paintings I found something new that I never noticed before. Uncle Ivan is the most talented artist I've ever met, and yet his work is not even known by the most obscure collectors. I wonder sometimes if he'll be like Van Gogh, and no one will properly know his genius until after he's gone. When he had a stroke and lost his ability to speak, he began painting obsessively, showing the world the beauty of his mind, which would have otherwise been lost without words. My parents built him a studio in our backyard for his 70th birthday. They have a friend in construction, and We had a large property in the country, so they built him a very big studio with high ceilings, knowing that he would find a way to utilize every inch available. And utilize he did. The walls were painted with a white primer, then he set himself to work. Inside the massive space, he created another world. Within a year, his designs were outlined in black and white splashes of color, beginning to amplify the space. Already, the overall effect was astonishing. It was like entering a surreal space of his own mind. An Alice in Wonderland. It sparked the imagination and resembled an uncanny landscape from dreams long forgotten. It was when the colors were completely filled that the illusion became complete. And one day, I went outside to his workspace in the backyard and found that he had vanished. He was gone. I couldn't make sense of it. Uncle Ivan? I called out in an empty, echoing studio, but he didn't answer. I gazed around in total wonderment. The huge room had been painted once again. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, alive with colors and images. I tried to find a spot of just black and white, where he'd still had fill in color, but couldn't find any. The fields of mushrooms with no inhabitants was so real. It's like I could step into it and join the merriment of fairy folk living there. Purple cloud mountains rose up steeply to the left of that. A field of pink cherry blossoms, trees sloping downward on the other side, towards a tumbling river, the color of cotton candy. This led into a sprawling desert scape, which started out in yellows and oranges and golds, and faded softly into greens and gentle blues of an ocean filled with kelp, octopus, and jellyfish, myrid, and other fantastic aquatic creatures. Wow, that sounds kind of sexy, not gonna lie. This should have been my Uncle Ivan's life for the past several years, and now it was finished. He should have been revealing his masterpiece. I thought he would have at least come to find me, to show me, but he knew I was his biggest fan after all, but where was he? The man was a total recluse, a hermit. He never left the property, no matter what. He often spent days straight in his studio working on an all-encompassing mural. I walked around the fantastical space, becoming lost in the swirling clouds and dreamlike images. Even the floors were painted, making it like you were completely immersed in the beautiful fantasy world that my uncle had made. A sound of birds chirping came from nearby, and I looked up with surprise, wondering if they had gotten into the workshop. When I gazed up and looked around, my heart skipped a beat, and then another. My knees buckled, and I sat down, my jaw snapping shut with the impact. Dew-moist grass was beneath me, despite never having left the studio. Strangely, the grass was crimson red, the color of flesh blood. Insects I didn't recognize were scurrying in it, crawling up my arm. They were colorful and otherworldly, leaving a rainbow pattern footprints wherever they wake. The field of towering mushrooms stood in front of me like I was actually there. It wasn't just an illusion. It wasn't just an illusion of art perspective and artistic mastery anymore. I could feel the fresh air on my face. I heard the birds chirping all around me. There was a sound of a flute playing in the distance. Ahead, the gnomes were dancing merrily. They were singing beneath the shade of the mushroom caps. Purple clouds floated in the sky. A giant eyeball looked down on me like the moon, winking when it saw me. Too scared to scream, I began to hyperventilate. Terrified, my eyes started to search for an exit, but no way out. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" A voice was heard nearby. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place my finger on it. "I thought you'd like it," my Uncle Ivan said, reaching out his hand to help me to my feet. Most people didn't understand what I was doing out here, but I could always see that you got it from the beginning. You knew what the purpose of it all was. Standing to my feet, my terror began to evaporate. I felt a smile spread across my face. Despite the surreal situation, I love the pun. Really, really good job. I found myself in. Uncle Ivan, you can talk? It had been so many years since I heard the old man's voice, I'd forgotten what it sounded like. I can, he said, looking pleased, at least while I'm here, but that's always been the case. Come on, let's go for a walk. We started ambling towards the mushroom village up ahead. The music of lutes and flutes and drums became louder. Sad that there wasn't a third alliteration. The gentle tones of singing voices rising up to greet us. I miss talking to you, Uncle Ivan, I said after a minute of silent walking. That's funny, we haven't really said anything yet. We both chuckled at that. Well, it's hard to find someone you're comfortable with just being quiet around as you are talking. And to be honest, I'm not sure what to say after saying all this. How long have you been coming here? Off and on for about a year. It was more off than on at first, but every time I came across a patch of black and white, and brought me out of it. But the more I filled in, the longer I got to stay. I thought about it for a minute. It's all the way filled now, does that mean? Before I could finish my thought, he interrupted, pointing at the sky and putting his arm around me. Look, Jordan, it's a spectral dragon. That's what I've been calling it anyway. A creature came out over the purple cloud, and like a sunrise came crashing down over the hills towards us, sending a flurry of cherry blossoms, fluttering in the air like butterflies. The dragon reminded me of a kaleidoscope, as it morphed into every color of the rainbow before rising up into the current at the last possible moment, narrowly avoiding crashing into the mushroom forest below. Its long, snake-like body extended for miles, and was soon lost above the clouds. A few moments later, the skyward cherry blossoms fell around us like snow, and it continued that way for a while afterwards, until the ground was pink from them. We kicked them into the air with our feet as we walked, like fallen leaves in autumn. The gnomes didn't even interrupt their song, as if it was an everyday occurrence, and it probably was. This place is incredible, I said. No wonder why you've spent so much time here. Uncle Ivan was smiling and nodding, seeing that I understood him even more now, but there was something off about him. He had lost weight. His face looked skeletal and thin. The change had been slow, so I barely noticed, since I came out to his workshop pretty much every day, but he previously had chubby cheeks and a belly which overhung his belt, but now those things were gone, and he appeared gaunt and pale. Come on, I'll show you to my house, he said, taking my hand. Your house? He led me to a slope towards the mushroom village. The stalks of fungi had windows and doors carved into them. The quaint little common community reminded me of the downtown, a small medieval village. There were rustic shops with tables out front, blacksmiths, market stalls, fruits and vegetables. Gnomes were going in their lives in harmony and happiness. "In here," Uncle Ivan said, opening a squeaky door at the base of one of the mushrooms. He ducked his head as he went inside, through the low entryway, and I followed after him. Once inside, I saw a tastefully decorated room with furnishings of purple and orange and gold, and there was no indication we were inside a mushroom. It just looked like a regular house, only circular instead of square. He went over to a large cabinet and began to pull things from his pockets, shoving them inside the drawers. He took a large horned beetle from one of his pockets of the bathrobe and stuffed it into a drawer. Then started searching through the drawers for something. I saw a purple octopus poke its head out, and he crammed it back inside. Another drawer. Another drawer sounded like it contained a swarm of bees. Killer bees. Well, another made it sound like it was a train whistle and the roar of a locomotive coming down the tracks. Uncle Ivan slammed that one shut quickly as a chugging and rattling noise approached as the train threatened to burst an eardrum. He breathed a sigh of relief as he opened the bottom drawer and retrieved a polka-dotted umbrella. He unfurled it. A dozen or so frogs fell out of the folds and began hopping around the floor. Okay, all set. How about some breakfast? The two of us set out into town, and we met gnomes along the way to a tea shop. They were singing Uncle Ivan's praises, literally. They had written several songs about him. Most seemed to proclaim him as the savior, a hero, vanquishing an enemy which came in the night. "What's with the creepy songs?" I asked him as we took a seat at our table outside the tea shop. "They're talking about the monster coming at night. It's not real, is it? I thought this place was about peace and beauty." "You can't have good without evil," my Uncle Ivan said, raising his hand to call over a gnome waiter. "Yin and yang. You need to have one to have the other. This place couldn't be what it is without an evil underbelly. For heaven to exist, there must be hell after all." So true, bestie, so true. Our waiter quickly poured our tea and then hustled away, his eyes fearful and his hand shaking after he overheard our conversation. Another member of the rate staff brought the platter of biscuits and cakes and hurried off, similarly in a frightened manner. Subjects were speaking out. "Does it always come at night, the monster in the song?" "Always, but it's okay. I know how to take care of it. I always protect the villagers here. They need me to protect them, so I'm their savior." His eyes looked like they began gazing into a far distance past me. I was suddenly worried again for my Uncle Ivan. I took a sip of my tea, but did not quench my thirst. I ate one of the cookies as well, but felt no less hungry afterwards. My Uncle Ivan ignored all the items in front of us, choosing instead to stare off into the distance once again. I remarked to myself how thin he looked and how unwell. Despite the beauty of his creation, despite the absolute remarkable nature of it all, I suddenly felt scared. Not for my uncle, but for me. I wanted to go home. I wanted to get out of this place. Opening my mouth, I began to speak these thoughts out loud. It suddenly grew dark in the mushroom village and surrounding fungi forest. A huge black cloud with blooming thunder rolling over. Rain began to pour down, drenching us immediately. Gnomes ran into their houses and slammed the doors and windows. Open signs were pulled down from the shops and replaced them with closed ones. And yet still, my Uncle Ivan stared off into the distance. "Uncle Ivan," I said, grabbing his shoulder and squeezing it. "Uncle Ivan, are you there?" My heart started pounding faster as his glazed eyes remained fixed on some invisible object in the distance. For a second I thought it would stay that way forever, but then he blinked and focused on me. "Oh, sorry, I must have been lost in my thoughts." He looked around and saw the darkness and the rain. He stood up, he said, "Oh dear, we should go quickly. Come on now, let's get back to the house before it's too late." At first I thought he was talking about going back to the real world, and I nearly jumped out of joy. I followed him in the pounding rain, splashed through mud puddles, and he led me back to the safe house inside his mushroom. It was only once we were inside that I heard the sounds coming from nearby, growing louder and more distinct. It sounded like a floor shaking approach of a bear or lion stalking towards us. My uncle grabbed a large wooden plank from behind the couch and brought it over. "Help me with this quickly. They'll be here any second." I hesitated, feeling as if there was something wrong, but then my fear took over, and I grabbed the other end of the wooden board and helped him lay it across the bear cave. A second later, the door began to pound and shake as something tried to force its way out from the inside. It sounded like claws racking across the wood as the thing roared and banged against the entry with all its might. "What the hell is that thing?" I asked my uncle. He was too busy to answer, searching his large dresser for countless tiny drawers. "Where is it? Where is it?" he shouted, pulling one thing after another. "It has to be here. It has to be." I ran over to him, looking back over my shoulder as the door nearly broke in two with the repeated impacts from outside. Now it sounded like not just one creature, but several, their claws tearing it through the wood like paper. "Uncle Ivan, we have to get out of here. They're going to kill us." As he pulled open the drawer, another. I saw the horrors inside each one. I will never forget the dresser had been full of fun and whimsical items I'd seen, but now, every dresser he opened had a nightmare inside. A hooded figure reached out with his skeletal arms and scythe gripping his bony fist. My uncle slammed the drawer and shut it before it could emerge. The next was a freakish monster with bulging eyes and squid-like tentacles. It snapped in the air and hissed, with a beaked mouth full of many sharp teeth. He closed that drawer hastily as well. The door had been barred shut and began to splinter. I could see forms of growing cracks in the wood. It seemed as if one more impact would break it. And we would be murdered by whatever was coming inside to greet us. All darkness, fangs, and claws by the look of it. My uncle finally found what he was looking for and pulled it out of the dresser, shouting triumphantly. "Yes, I found it," he said. "Let's get out of here." It was a paintbrush and an easel. He began to paint a picture on the wall beside him, working quickly. It didn't seem possible. A few minutes after he began, there was a beautiful doorway in the blue sky and sunshine. There were trees and green glassy fields rolling into the distance. "Come on through here," he said, grabbing my arm. I didn't move, though. Something about this was all wrong, I thought to myself. Uncle Ivan needed my help, and this wasn't the only way to help him. Escaping further into the fantasy world, going one step deeper into the dimension, this was not going to help him. I studied his bony face and looked at his thin, frail hand and reaching out to take mine. "Come on, what are you waiting for?" he asked. Looking terrified, I checking over his shoulder with the impact from outside. "This isn't the way, Uncle Ivan," I said, realizing what I meant when I said it. "That's not the way home. I need to take you home. You need to eat and drink. You need to get out of this place for a little while. You can't survive here. You can't live inside of this world you created, or it'll kill you." "What? No, I can't leave. This is my home now. I need to protect it." The door splintered with another loud bang as the dark forces came outside, weighed against the threshold. "Do you know what's on the other side of that door, Uncle Ivan? Have you ever waited to see what will come through? Or do you just escape further into your fantasies and run away every time?" He hesitated, looking as if he might jump through the doorway without me, escaping into that world that had never been seen again. But then he turned and looked at me. He let out a deep, shuddering breath. "No. I've always run from it. I suppose I should look at it, shouldn't I?" "We all need to face our fears sometimes, Uncle Ivan," I said, taking his hand. "We'll face it together, whatever it is." He gripped my hand tightly, and we stood waiting for our demise, whatever would come next. With a loud crash of the door, broke down to dark forms and shapes of every alpha predator began to squeeze through. Looking oversized, nightmare images of true selves, shadowy bodies with no discernible features except for teeth. Their teeth were too long and sharp, gleaming white. As they closed in on us, I focused on the lack of color and remembered those blank spots in the mural. I thought about home. I braced for impact, and for those teeth would tear me to shreds, but they never came. When I opened my eyes, all I saw in front of me was a wolf, painted in black and white. It hadn't been filled yet. A ray of sunshine was peeking through the doorway which led outside, and I could hear birds chirping. We were back in my great-uncle's studio again, and he was beside me, holding my hand, squeezing it very tightly. Both of us let go at the same time, looking at each other, and feeling slightly embarrassed for some reason. As if what had just happened really happened. "Looks like you missed a spot after all," I said to my uncle. He looked back at me, and I saw his tears. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Instead, he picked up his paintbrush, which he was sitting nearby an easel. Various colors were on the board, waiting to be chosen to make the mural truly complete. My uncle went over to the spot with his paintbrush in hand, looking ready to fill in the emptiness. As he picked up the brush, he started to shake, and maybe from hunger, maybe from something else, I laid a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Why don't you take a break for a little while, Uncle Ivan? Let's go inside and grab a bite to eat. The mural will still be here tomorrow." He turned to look at me and smiled. He set the paintbrush and easel down to the floor again. Putting his arm around my shoulder, the two of us walked from the paint fumes and into the fresh air of the backyard. You know, I was kind of bummed when I found out the mural was finished. This project has been such a big part of both of our lives for these past few years. Maybe you should just leave that one blank spot, like a signature, a reminder of all time of the effort you put in here in the real world. He nodded, his eyes focused and lucid for the first time I'd seen him all day. Uncle Ivan pointed a large mountain off in the distance. It took me a second to understand, but I'd always been able to see what he meant in these muted moments, and I did then too. Yeah, like a landmark, so no matter what, you can always find your way home. Wow, that was really nice. I like that one. It's not really spooky, but it was pretty nice. I definitely, I'd give it about maybe a 6 out of 10. It could be better. It's not spooky. It was just kind of cute. And these are horror stories, so, sorry, 6 out of 10. I hope these 2 stories were enough for you guys today. I did have quite a bit of bloopers from the last 3 episodes, so maybe I should save them up and compile them into a blooper reel. Anyways, remember to check out the Discord and stay spooky. Till next time, Marshy out.